Every 4 years, Americans cast their ballot in a presidential election, typically drawing more people to the polls than state and local elections. This year, the coronavirus pandemic has complicated the process and what is already a hectic time for statewide boards of elections. I took an in-depth look into what the general election has in store for voters and what you can expect in November, whether you plan to cast your vote in person or by mail. This is an atypical election, so we are giving you all of the details voters in Rhode Island need to feel confident when casting their ballot.
Rhode Islanders can absolutely trust the integrity of our election system.
Officials say changes to the election process are necessary as the country adjusts to our new normal in the coronavirus pandemic. As a result, Rhode Island has made it easier to vote without going to the polls on Election Day. You have 3 ways to vote this November. You can choose to vote by mail, early in person, or at your local polling location on November 3rd. But Rhode Island Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea says these 3 ways to vote aren't new.
Those 3 options have always been there. We always had mail ballots. We've always had some form of early voting through either an emergency mail ballot or something else. And then we've always had the election day. So these are not new, but we've really publicized them and tweak them a little bit to make them easier during a pandemic.
Typically, mail ballots would need to be signed by 2 witnesses or notarized, but that requirement and some others have been waived. The United States Supreme Court, in fact, denied attempts by Rhode Island Republicans to block these changes.
I feel very comfortable that voting from home is very safe and that it will be, that your vote, if you're an eligible voter, will be counted.
To advertise the use of mail ballots, the Secretary of State's office sent every registered voter in Rhode Island a mail ballot application. But some Rhode Islanders reached out to 12 News after they received mail ballot applications for someone who has since died or no longer lives there, raising concerns about the possibility of fraud in the election process.
You would have to go through a lot of trouble to actually represent somebody that you're not, starting with the fact that you would have to forge their signature, and you would be committing a felony that's punishable by actual jail time.
If it was sent to someone who no longer lives there, the Secretary of State asks to return the application, which will also help clean up the voter rolls.
People who are skeptical of the process, they think that it opens the system up to fraud. What would you say to those people?
I would say call us. We'll walk you through your fears because we have taken precautions at every step of the way.
Those precautions include double verifying signatures by both state and local election officials. This is to ensure someone doesn't vote under a different name.
So there's 2 sets of eyes, different sets of eyes, looking at each mail ballot to make sure that it is being voted on by the right person.
U.S. intelligence agencies have warned of Russia's attempts to interfere with the 2020 election, but Gorbea says the state has tools in place to protect against a cyber threat.
We have taken precautions in terms of paper copies and software copies and all sorts of security that we can't get into to make sure that we defend ourselves and protect the election.
As for casting your ballot, you'll need to plan ahead if you plan on voting by mail. The deadline to submit a mail ballot application is October 13th with your local board of canvassers. Once you receive a mail ballot, it must be returned to the Rhode Island Board of Elections by 8 p.m. on Election Day in order to be counted. Other important deadlines to note: you can vote early in person at your city or town hall from October 14th through November 2nd. And if you still need to register to vote in the November election, you have until October 4th to do so.
What do you recommend voters do?
It's very much a personal option. What I really want is that every eligible voter does vote.
As for Massachusetts, the deadline to register to vote is October 24th. The Commonwealth suggests submitting the mail ballot application no later than October 20th. Applications received after October 28th cannot be processed. To return the mail ballot in Massachusetts, they must have a postmark no later than November 3rd and be back at your local election office by November 6th. There are now efforts to have Rhode Island also count ballots that arrive after November 3rd if they are postmarked. Advocacy groups like the Rhode Island ACLU and good government group Common Cause Rhode Island are calling on Governor Gina Raimondo to issue an executive order to make the change.
We want a policy to be put in place that would allow ballots that come in within 3 days of election night, so by November 6th, to be counted as long as they have a postmark by November 3rd, by election day, or any ballot that comes in November 4th, the day after the election, even if it doesn't have a postmark.
Marion says they fear that voters new to using mail ballots will not know to get their ballot in the mail early to make sure it gets returned by 8 p.m. on election night. When asked, Governor Gina Raimondo's office said the proposal is currently before the Rhode Island Board of Elections for consideration. However, the deputy director of the Board of Elections, Miguel Nunez, says it's not something they are taking up at this time. Another reason there is a push to allow postmark ballots be counted involves issues with the Postal Service and the possibility of delayed mail. But the Secretary of State says she is confident in Rhode Island's postal officials and their ability to pick up and deliver mail ballots on time. Nunez, too, says he has faith in the Postal Service, but as a precaution, he is encouraging voters to drop their mail ballots in the designated drop boxes set up in cities and towns throughout Rhode Island.
If you're within a week of November 3rd and you haven't mailed your ballot back, we would suggest that you actually drop it into one of the authorized drop boxes rather than put it in the mail, just because it's just a little bit more of an assurance that that ballot will be counted if you drop it into one of those drop boxes, because once it's dropped in there, it's actually considered received by the Board of Elections.
As for when we will get the results on Election Day, the Secretary of State says it could take a few days.
We're not going to have the results on election night because we're going from a system where we had people mostly voting on election day to one where a lot of mail ballots are going to be received. We've already received 75,000 mail ballot requests here for this election. So there's nothing nefarious going on.
Now, if you want to learn more about the key races here in Rhode Island, I talk with 12 News politics editor Ted Nesi about what to watch for. You can find that as well as a detailed voter guide on our website at WPRI.com. I'm Anita Buffoni, 12 News.